have some interesting sessions upcoming. First up on this part of today's docket will be a presentation from Ariane Heisey and Michael Fox related to Indigenous-led EAs, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Ariane, Michael, if you wouldn't mind joining us at the podium whenever you're ready, we'll get underway.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I have to say it wouldn't be an OAIA conference without a session that is somehow Ring of Fire related, because as long as I can remember, there's always been a session, and Cheryl's not here to do her annual session on this, so we'll take it up for her. I'd just like to extend apologies from Qasim Sadiq. He was supposed to be here to present. I'm standing in his stead. He is up engaging on the Martin Falls Community Access Road, and we were on the road last week for the Northern Road Link. So today we're going to be talking about Indigenous-led environmental assessments, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'm just going to provide some context, and then I'm going to hand it over to Michael Fox, who's really good at talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So just to do a quick contextual piece, there are 3 road projects. They are all distinct projects, 3 of them, different proponents and different purposes. So here's just a quick recap. We have the Northern Road Link project, where both Martin Falls First Nation and Webequie First Nation are co-proponents. It's a proposed all-season, multi-use gravel road that's going to be somewhere between 117 kilometers to 164 kilometers in length, depending on the preferred alternative. And its purpose is to connect the mineral deposits in the Ring of Fire area to the highway network via the Martin Falls Community Access Road. This will also create an opportunity for Webequie First Nation to connect to the highway network. So the second project is the Martin Falls Community Access Road. Martin Falls is the sole proponent of this project. Again, it's a multi-purpose all-season road, gravel road, and it is going to be somewhere between 190 and 230 kilometers in length, again, depending on the preferred alternative. Its distinct purpose is that it is actually going to connect the Martin Falls First Nation to the highway network. It does create an opportunity, though, to connect the mineral deposits to the highway network as well. The third project is the Webequie Supply Road, where Webequie First Nation is the sole proponent. Again, it's an all-season, multi-purpose gravel road, approximately 107 kilometers in length. And its purpose is to connect Webequie First Nation to the mineral deposit area near McFalls Lake, which is the Ring of Fire area. And again, it will create an opportunity for Webequie to connect to the highway network. And there, just to put it in perspective, the purple is the Martin Falls Community Access Road, the red across the top is the Webequie Supply Road, and the piece in between is the Northern Road Link. So, how did these projects get started? Martin Falls has, as long as I can remember, wanted to have all-season access to the community. And they've completed numerous feasibility studies over the year. They finally approached the province that they wanted to go ahead with the Martin Falls Community Access Road, and they volunteered to undertake a provincial environmental assessment. And at the same time, they also considered for the future that depending on where the Martin Falls Community Access Road would go, it would provide an opportunity, an economic development opportunity to go up to the Ring of Fire. And that, those ideas sort of took off, and Martin Falls had discussions with Webequie, and together they decided to partner to undertake the EA for what is known as the Northern Road Link. According to the chief of Martin Falls, undertaking these EAs, they wanted to do so that the community could actually look forward to having a brighter future by having access to the highway network. This would provide opportunities for the community to grow and be part of the social and economic fabric of both the region and the country. And it would allow them to build partnerships with business and government to grow these social and economic opportunities. And they also wanted to make sure that the community would still have access to the land and continue their role as stewards of the land. So, from the perspective of Webikwe First Nations, Webikwe has also participated in a number of studies with other area First Nations to look at options to connect the communities with each other and subsequently to the highway network. And there was a feasibility study that was funded by the province and the federal government to do so. And 4 of the remote Matawa member communities participated in that. And as part of that feasibility study, they did select a preferred route, but one of the issues was that the route could not include an access to the mineral deposits. So this prevented an all-season road project from advancing. But Webikwe was persistent, and they were still interested in pursuing an option to connect to the highway and to connect to the mineral deposits as an economic development opportunity. So the Webikwe Supply Road will facilitate the movement of materials, supplies, and people from the Webikwe Airport, which they're planning to expand, to the mineral exploration and proposed mine development in the Falls Lake area. And will also provide employment and other economic development opportunities to Webikwe First Nation community members and their businesses. And they did volunteer to undertake an EA for the Webikwe Supply Road, and then subsequently in discussions with Martin Falls, they collaborated to undertake the EA for what's known as the Northern Road Link. So why are these EAs unique? Well, first of all, they are probably the first, or very close to the first, Indigenous-led EAs in the province of Ontario, where the First Nations are the sole proponent, that they're not partnering with somebody else. And so Martin Falls and Webikwe are proponents of their road projects for the purposes of the EA, and what makes them unique is that they actually are guided by community principles and knowledge. And they are doing this within the context of the existing environmental and impact assessment framework. So they're not coming up with their own whole process. They are using the existing process, but they're making sure that the process that they follow is guided by community principles and knowledge. The other thing that makes them unique is the role of the community membership. So both communities are having a say in how these EA proceeds, and every inflection point and decision that's made along the way in these processes goes back to the community for review and approval, etc. The communities recognize that the EA and IA process is a planning and decision-making process, and they will use the results of these EAs to make their decisions about the development that takes place on their respective territories. I think the other thing that makes these unique is that these EAs are going to be setting the standard for future Indigenous-led EAs, and watch out, that's going to be the trend in the future. So that's sort of providing the context. I'm now going to hand it over to Michael to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of being an Indigenous proponent.
Thank you. I think first things first, the first thing here is the First Peoples. I just wanted to acknowledge the lands of my brothers and sisters here in the GTA area. It's always good to visit, and my work brings me across the country, and learn a lot from coast to coast to coast. So what is the good when you have this project in here? When you go back 15 years ago in the Ring of Fire, all you heard was protest by the actual people of the communities. Webikwe and Martin Falls, protesting this because of probably 40 plus junior exploration companies on a staking rush in their homelands. Just Webikwe alone probably had 8 to 12 helicopters every day with fuel drums coming in and out. Like, that airport wasn't designed for that. And nor was the harvesting activities not impacted. They were. And so they started protesting, you know, all the mining companies in there. And we brought our videography folks in there and capture that moment and send it to the news, and they had enough. And you can find those things on YouTube or in our project sites and in documentary that's coming on. So in 15 years, how did it go from protests to proponents? That's a big journey, right? The total opposition to actually directional force to the developments. Well, they learned, you know, with the company, and they had some willing governments start looking at, you know, how can these communities exercise their rights, you know, in a different way. Not just about protection, you know, but about their livelihood, you know, and their lifestyles. So they had to kind of reimagine, you know, their lands. They had to reimagine their lives, you know, for the future generation. And they know that, like the elders there and the leadership hear their voices of the communities, and things have changed. The thing about Webquay too is that the reserve was actually created in 2001. So this ain't ancient history, you know, for them when they had the settlement lands and later the reserve lands for themselves, and the beginnings of a community development initiative and efforts that they had in that community. So the good here, I think, is UNDRIP. And people you know, there's 46 articles in UNDRIP. People focus on free, prior, informed consent because that's what the news focuses on. But they focus on other elements, other articles of UNDRIP. And one of those articles is the right to economic self-determination. You know, exercising that right for themselves, their chosen path for development. I invite you to read UNDRIP, all of it. And how different communities across Canada are exercised in different articles of that, of UNDRIP. I just made these notes when I was sitting down here, so I got capacity building. That's a big deal. You know, I think I'm not saying it's easier to say no. It kind of is. It's harder to lead a major undertaking because the interactive complexities you have to deal with as a project proponent, it's you know, I negotiated all kinds of stuff, and it's a lot kind of easier on the First Nations side because you're demanding things, right? When you're on the other side, it's a bit more like you're gonna have to work it a bit harder. Because you got to cut the check at the end of the day for the capacity, for the demands and requirements to move forward, you know, to get the social acceptance of a project. So capacity building, I've seen that in these remote communities, and that's a multi-generational effort to produce people committed to certain things, you know, and wanting to do that. You can have a roster of occupations and put it in front of people. It doesn't mean they want to get involved in it, and especially if they don't not sure what it is. And what does that actually mean at the end of the day? Because it has to be meaningful to the community members and what that is. So it's a slow process, and we learned that the hard way. You know, we got government funding and put it all in place, and thinking, you know, there was initial excitement. You know, just simple things like the BEAR program. You know, we put it up there, and I think we had 10 or 11 people in the beginning of the week. You had one at the end of the week. Week one. And it was skill-based. And what we learned from there is, like, people have to understand the why. Why are they getting involved in this? You know, the environmental stewardship, you know, the bigger picture, why they're going to get involved and get these skills. And not just put devices in front of them. You know, and say, this is how you're going to use these things. I said, why? And that was the learning that Webquay had to learn, as well as Martin Falls. So capacity building is a big thing. The other thing is the capacity building around the environmental assessment process. You know, what is the regulatory process, and why are these kind of rules are there, and all that kind of stuff. So trying to understand that both on the federal and provincial level was a big deal. And then getting involved in the field studies. You know, they got involved in caribou studies, and the techniques around caribou studies, the wolverine studies, even the membership got the baits for the wolverine studies. We used the fishery studies, they just went on their own. Go, do what you guys do, just bring us back some samples, for chemical analysis, et cetera. So that capacity involvement took a while, so they have some kind of say, and also participation in their own study. Remember, the community, Webequie and Martin Falls, in the Northern Road Link and WSR, there's not a corporation there managing it. It's them, pure proponents, pure communities. The First Nations themselves are the proponents. It's not a development corp, it's not an LP, it's the First Nations. And so they're in it to win it and taking all the risk around that, right, with the members. So if something goes wrong, the chief and council are out. So they're very careful in cultivating, the support and the understanding and the capacity to move forward as Indigenous proponents of these roads. One of the funnest parts is actually braiding Western and Indigenous knowledge, and the mainstream methodological approaches to things, and how I think it was Cliffs Natural Resources, in their sturgeon studies, said this river doesn't have any sturgeon. Meanwhile, Donald, I don't know if you remember Donald. Donald goes, I mean, there's no sturgeon. I just got one. And brought it over to the man office. I just got this from this river, like this. And so it's interesting that this spot and time and space, around the methods versus actually getting the community involved in some of these studies. In this case, it was a mining company that was starting their baseline, and they didn't include the community. And they actually demonstrated that they have something to contribute, and so there's sort of the weaving together of the both type of knowledges. And creative approaches to engagement. So COVID forced us on this. There's always this debate between high touch and high tech around Indigenous communities, and obviously high touch is the preference, to be in person, with Indigenous communities, especially the far north. And in that, are we running out of time? Okay, plow through this. Because of COVID, we were forced to go online. Right, and we got very creative on the radio call-in shows. Northern Ontario has their own Wawate radio that we use, and then getting people engaged that way. The live streaming, and then sort of the social media strategy. So those of us that are a little bit savvy, I had to learn around the micro-targeting of Facebook. So you wonder why you may get some ads on your Facebook for it's because there's micro-targeting back end that you can learn that, say you guys all live in Toronto and you guys are interested in EAs and you want to advertise something, you can actually micro-target that in Facebook. So if suddenly the ad comes out on maybe this conference, kind of thing. So you can micro-target these back end, these First Nations in the far north and get them to see the ads and click it and then show up to the website or actually the landing page of the event. I already talked about the field work. The regional assessment. I think the chief and council are neutral, if not in favor of the regional assessment. All they see this as another generation of information. The way you read it, it's kind of just a baseline study, for the mines in the future, and that's how it was kind of rolled out in the beginning. Where the added complexity happens is when the other communities want things up and above the RA. What's understood as the regional assessment versus the regional assessment plus. It's the plus around shared decision making, jurisdiction. That's where it gets a little problematic, for some folks. All right. Right here? Arrow? The bad. So this is where and these are just broad. I'm not saying bad actors or bad like I just we're just trying to get creative with our titles, the good, the bad, the ugly. So so the First Nations, they submitted the project description and the tour. They had their own list of communities based on a criteria. The criteria based on family relations, based on shared territory, shared history, shared culture in that region. So you have like Gordon is the director of Lands and Resources. His brother lives in Casablanca and is on the council because he married in over there. So like they know each other in that region. So they put forth their own list of 8 communities. These based on what they know. Not I'm talking about the Crown's A-tree system, their system around what they know, whose rights may be impacted or not. This is Webbequa's own assessment of who they think should be included to consult and engage. And then the feds gave us 10, and the provincial governments gave us 22. So it kind of confirmed the myth of the indivisible crown for me. Like there's something off there. Like if we're going to collaborate, let's collaborate, right? on that end. So that I found that a little problematic. And in some of those communities, we went to like KI, the chief. He won't put it on paper. Chief Donnie Morris. He goes, "Why are you here?" Like in our chief and council meeting, like, "Why are you here talking about the Webbequay supply road? Like it's so far away from us. Like it's a dirt road." I said, "Exactly. It's a donkey trail, right?" And he goes, "I don't know why you're here," including Wapakika, like the ones way far north where the waterways is like it's not even touching. It goes up to the Hudson Bay, not the James Bay. The Indigenous knowledge. There's nothing there to compel the First Nations to get involved in IK. And the worry for us is that if there's nothing there to compel the IK, and then you're doing the baseline, all of a sudden you're close to the effects assessment, you need the right and you don't have the IK, and then it becomes sort of a leverage point, or another delay tactic by those communities that are playing that game, right? It's like the 11th hour again, and the same Aboriginal rights lawyers or the Aboriginal or Indigenous consultants like that want to play that game for leverage. There's nothing that becomes a bit problematic in that whole IK. So yeah, you're going to do IK, we'll support you, but they don't do it because they know that if they don't have to do it, and then it's hard for you to write your effects assessment, right? Especially the integrating all that kind of stuff. You're compelled as a proponent to do it. I find that a little bit problematic. And I don't know why they wouldn't do it. When you think about it, why would it, like Attawabscat and Niskanaga, I'm going to say names. Why wouldn't they not do the far north community-based land use planning to collect, the land utilization patterns, there's sites of Indigenous cultural significance. It's basically like an IK program, for a whole area that they can demarcate. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Webbequay, Martin Falls did it. And they can demonstrate today, where they exercise their Aboriginal treaty rights. So when Attawabscat went to court on Juno, a junior exploration company, they were slapped in the hands for not providing any evidence of how Attawabscat exercised their rights. Like Attawabscat got their hands slapped. Everybody got their hands slapped on that court case, to let you know. But they didn't provide any evidence in the exercise of how they exercised their rights and the Juno permit. And so the dance was, and the Juno just was fed up with their lawyer, phoning them all the time, demanding an exploration agreement. That's what they wanted at the end of the day. So what you read in the press is not what's actually happening in the background, right? There's always a story. There's always a backstory to the cover story. And that one backstory was that Attawabscat's lawyer wanted an exploration agreement in the Ring of Fire to have a toehold in there. But they couldn't provide any evidence that they're exercising their rights in that area related to that permit, kind of thing. And why wouldn't, so like we did it, and we have a starting point for our IK program around that. So the coordinated, I'll be gentle. I guess I got a different idea of coordination, right? For me, coordination is efficiency. That's not what I'm experiencing. You know, and I'm being fair, that's not what I experience in Ontario, is the efficiency. You know, people talk about regulatory efficiency, both levels of government, but I don't see it. We're trying to work on that. No, that's all I'm going to say. The ugly. I'm feeling the cane here, so I'm trying to get through this. Oh yeah, so the shared territories, the engaging. I really don't understand why some Aboriginal rights lawyers and Indigenous advisors are saying don't engage. So what was interesting is that Niskanaga, I'll say another court case, last Friday, you know, lost their case. They were doing a judicial, not a judicial review, a judicial interpretation of the act and how it applies to them. And we put in our record of consultation, weekly basis reaching out to them. You know, they had no comments on that during the proceedings because there's nothing to comment. It's like, well, why didn't you respond to them? Kind of thing. Like, if you're the judge, here's hundreds of pages of engagement logs that on a weekly basis they're trying to reach out to you in any way you want to engage and consult. Right? We'll follow your protocol, which basically means you meet them outside the community, go through their documents or documents with them. Very simple. There's nothing. There's no mystique behind what they offer during their consultation process. Anyways, they lost their case. You know, they brought that forward. So why would not just participate? Why? You know, my cousin from Winness says to me, goes, I don't get why the guys are afraid of information. And they face polar bears and wolves, packs of wolves, but they're afraid of information. It's like, what is that about? Kind of thing. But it's a game. And that's the ugly part of the game, is that the guy I went to university with, Lakehead University, runs the Attawapiskat Development Corporation. It's the nonprofit. It's not the LP, the nonprofit. His name is Doug Kabuki. I asked him, what do you know about the roads? Zero. Because the information that we're trying to provide to the community members and empower them information doesn't get to them because of these blockers, you know, in there. So that's the ugly part. The other one is the NGOs and the misinformation. I grew up in Winness on the Hudson Bay coastline. No one ever said breathing lands before. I asked my uncle, you ever heard that phrase? Peatlands? Like, you ever heard of peatlands? Like breathing lands? Never. We're studying all the constituent parts of peatlands. Groundwater, right? Surface water, the vegetation, the habitats, you know, kind of like, but, you know, functional peatland analysis we're going to be doing. But when you ask the community, like, what do you think about the peatlands? And what do you mean? You know, like, you're talking about the habitats, you know, you're talking about, you know, harvesting areas, like, you know, like, so it's funny how the discourse changes over time. And when the NGOs come in and frame things up in a different way, it has nothing to do with the communities, kind of thing. So, like, you know, to me, that's kind of misleading, if not misinformation or disinformation about, you know, what the true intent of these two communities are trying to do. They care, if there's any group across Canada that cares about this area, it's these people. It's these people. That's their homelands. Their members harvest the areas. They have sacred sites and stuff like that that they care about. Okay, I got to wrap it up. The beautiful. I think the number one thing you got to understand that doesn't get out there, and we try to educate the journalists, they got a human rights framework and they just walk in, they just got to populate their story and they go out there and they write it. So what you read in the newspaper is not what the communities, two communities' vision for themselves are. You know, all you hear, if you did a media content analysis, you would think that there's this monster company that's scaring all these Indigenous. There is no, there's none of the companies in the Ring of Fire are doing an environmental assessment right now. The only ones that are doing environmental impact assessment are the two communities. Fact. Like, there's no companies doing it. It's just the two communities doing the environmental impact. It's about the most expensive and extensive environmental impact study baseline ever done in that region. Tens of millions of dollars. Because they care about the land. You want to make sure they get it right. So one of the impulses why they're doing it is that they want to generate the information to make an informed decision. I'll say that again. They're doing it because they want to generate the information to make an informed decision. That's key for them. Number two is they're exercising their economic right, to improve the quality of life for their members. Number three is they don't want to be victims of development. They want to be agents of development. They do that through exercising leadership. And what's leadership? Leadership, is something providing the directional force to something. And these two communities are providing the directional force to these roads and all the studies. So what does that mean? They're leading the EIA, they're leading the engagement consultation process, they're leading the negotiations for governance and ownership of the roads. They're exercising their leadership. And finally, I would say they want what you want. They want good health care for the elders. They want good schools for their youth. They want good jobs for their members. That's what they want. Same thing you guys want. Be rich.
Thank you very much, Michael and Ariane. Next up, we have Ryan Doyle and Allison Williams from HDR presenting on the topic of the Inuit-led submarine cable routing and feasibility study. So, Ryan, Allison, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, great, thank you. So good morning, and thanks, looking forward to speaking to you today. So our discussion today is to present our experiences on the Kavalik Hydrofiber Link submarine cable routing and feasibility study, how this type of preliminary routing assessment can be carried out in the pre-planning stages, which is where it is now, in an innovative and timely manner, considering various information sources, data acquisition tools, some of the challenges we faced in doing the feasibility study, a permitting review, and just a discussion and review of our assessment strategies, lessons learned, and next steps. Sorry. That would have been helpful to have up right away, sorry. Agenda. This just gives us a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. What is the KHFL? Our goals in the feasibility study, some of the opportunities and constraints, the data collection and the gaps and the challenges we faced, and a permitting review. So introductions, I'm Ryan Doyle, a senior planner with HDR. Allison Williams is a co-presenter with us today. We're lucky we have Darcy Quinn, Senior Director of Commercial Planning and Business Development with NUKIC. Hi, Darcy. Unfortunately, Sarah Zappala, our routing and siting engineer and lead, had a family emergency and couldn't join us today. So I will do my best to cover what she had, but if there's any detailed technical questions, we can take those away for another day. So here I will pass it over to Darcy to talk a bit about what the Kavalik Hydrofiber Link is.
Great. Thanks, Ryan. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So thank you for the invitation today, and my apologies for not being able to join in person. My role this morning is just to introduce the Kavalik Hydrofiber Link project and NUKIC Corporation, who is the Inuit-led proponent for the KHFL. So NUKIC, as I mentioned, is 100% Inuit-owned business based in Rankin Inlet, Nunavut. Rankin Inlet, for those who don't know, is the largest hamlet in the Kavalik region, which is on the west coast of the Hudson Bay, directly north of Manitoba. Nukik is owned by the Kavalik Inuit Association and Saku Investments Corp. The KIA is the designated Inuit organization whose elected officials represent the interests of all Inuit living in the Kavalik region. And Saku is a really impressive business that is their economic development corp that is 100% owned by the Kavalik Inuit Association. The Kavalik region has 7 communities and 2 mines in operation. Each community and mine relies 100% on diesel for their electricity needs. This makes the electricity in the region some of the most costly and carbon intensive in North America. I was speaking with one of my colleagues today, and he says that his rates for electricity is 68 cents a kilowatt hour. And the government rate pays more, and they pay close to $1 a kilowatt hour. So it is a huge cost for the communities up there. Diesel is shipped in tankers from Quebec. They get 3 shipments a year, and they're stored in massive tank farms like the ones just behind me here in Rankin Inlet. And so this obviously creates major risks of fuel spills, which would harm the pristine environment here. Dating back to the foundation of Nunavut back in 1999, there has been discussions about connecting Manitoba and Nunavut with a road and transmission line to help improve the economic development and also reduce the diesel dependence. But for a number of reasons, the projects have never really gotten off the ground. Largely that challenge is the government of Nunavut is dealing with so many other crippling infrastructure challenges that this project just does not get the prioritization it needs. However, when Nunavut was founded, an infrastructure corridor was identified in the original Nunavut land use plan, and that's been something that we've been working with since we started working on the project. Recognizing the importance of clean energy, low cost energy, and faster internet, the KIA decided that they were going to take on building a transmission line from northern Manitoba to the Kavalik region. And that's what we call the Kavalik Hydrofiber Link. And the project would bring clean electricity as well as fiber optic internet into the region. We're working within this 10-kilometer corridor that is identified in the Nunavut land use plan. And the project would be sized to bring enough clean electricity into the region to support growth in the communities and in the region for multiple generations. So it's a transformative project for the region. Also, the project, one of the other opportunities with this project is the Kavalik region is home to some of the best untapped renewable energy resources in North America, particularly wind. And the line would be designed for 2-way electricity trade so that if Nunavut develops enough electricity to supply their own needs, they could actually sell it down to the south and create economic opportunities that way. Nukik was incorporated in 2021 to lead this project. We're a small team of about five individuals on our team, but we've built a very strong group of partners because that's how Inuit develop and solve their problems is through partnerships. We've got the Canada Infrastructure Bank, who has signed a development agreement with us, and they provide development funding to the project, along with the federal government and Inuit orgs providing funding in the project. And then we have development partners in ATCO, Ballard Construction, and NextEra Energy, who help us with the design, development, and financing of the project. And we also have KPMG as our financial advisor. So we've got a really strong team. Then we've got an executive team, myself and 2 others who have experience in the development and operation of renewable energy systems as well. we call the project in the development phase, which is still that planning phase. We're working through all the technical, social, commercial, and economic questions that we need before we move into the full environmental assessment and engagement process. We've done our preliminary business case, and we've been working with the federal government to understand how the funding instruments that were introduced in budget 2023 can help this project, because there's a number of investment tax credits that were introduced that have some benefit to the project. The team over the years has engaged and done a lot of early engagement with communities and baseline field work, because in Nunavut, there is no linear infrastructure in the region, so they don't really know what to expect. So we've been doing a lot of information gathering, helping inform the community members, the councils, the hamlets, and the hunter and trapper organizations what this project could look like. And we've been doing a lot of field work, understanding the wildlife, the aquatic, the heritage, all those components. It's not engagement, but we call it early engagement, because we just recognize we need to do a lot of work. Sorry. And then going back in 2022, our board asked us to look. Our board is 100% Inuit, and they started to hear some concerns about this project going over the land, and they asked us whether it was possible to look at a submarine cable option to potentially just minimize the impact on the land. And we thought that was an interesting idea, and so we engaged HDR to do this work and help us do an assessment about the technical and commercial viability of doing a submarine cable option. And this is what Ryan and his team will talk about today. Ryan, I'll pass it back over to you.
So, as Darcy mentioned, we're in the very early stages here of project development. So they're looking at various alternatives, one of which is the submarine cable. So that's what we're going to focus on today in terms of the feasibility report. So the goal of the original goal of the feasibility study really is to identify any red flags. Is this possible? Is it buildable? So these studies at this stage are typically very data heavy, relying on readily available data. So this was essentially a desktop study at this stage. They do have short turnaround times, so this is being used as a screening tool to help identify those high-level fatal flaws, if it can be built. And then the proponents would take this and use it as part of their decision-making and planning process. So as part of that, our team developed a GIS web mapper-based tool to pull in all the existing available data that we collected and mapped, so that we can use that to help identify potentially feasible corridors. And within these corridors, then we looked at potential opportunities, constraints, data gaps, regulatory triggers, as well as constructability risks. Allison is going to talk a little bit more about the GIS mapper and some of the data that we were able to pull in just later in the presentation. So routing and siting. This is a high-level overview of the process that we were using. The feasibility study is, again, one of those first tools in the routing and siting process. So we used an integrated team approach right from the beginning, working with the engineers, right-of-way specialists, and of course NUKIC and their input. As this is still very much in those early feasibility stages, one of the key next steps would be for NUKIC to further engage, as Darcy was mentioning, as the project moves forward. In addition, the key goal here is to begin documenting and tracking all of our information for the routing and siting, so that the submarine cable, as it moves forward, if it moves forward, will have the information needed to support stakeholder outreach, agency engagement, and input to any permit applications. As part of the first step in the routing and siting feasibility study, we focused on 3 key activities. So identifying the technical guidelines and criteria to construct it and route it, reviewing readily available data and identifying those opportunities and constraints. So when working with the engineers and NUKIC, we were able to identify relevant technical criteria for the project components. The technical criteria are used to help identify project design needs and identify the parameters on how we site and route. For example, for the landfall locations, we're looking to avoid critical environmental areas, be close to interconnection points where they would then distribute the energy into the community, and to help minimize cable routes and also find suitable areas that have enough space to accommodate construction. For the submarine cable, it's important to minimize changes in slope and elevation because the cable can't, you have to manage the overall drop and how the cable can't bend very easily, obviously. So target sediments that support cable burial, so generally softer sediments, and minimize the overall length while avoiding and minimizing potential impacts to conflicting uses and significant resources. So in terms of the cable technology that we're looking at here, due to the length of the potential cable route, underwater, it'd be high voltage direct current, so HVDC, which is the cable transmission technology versus, for instance, AC technology, which is what you see most of the time in overhead lines. Another step in the desktop process at this stage is identifying both onshore and offshore opportunities and constraints. These are typically resources at this stage such as bathymetry, protected areas, sensitive species, to name a few. The opportunities are generally features along which the transmission line development is potentially compatible and where impacts to resources can be reduced, whereas constraints are generally resources or conditions that could limit or prevent the transmission line interconnection from being developed and or routed. Avoiding these resources or conditions is certainly a goal, but it's not necessarily a requirement, as there are often ways to mitigate them, but if they're unmitigatable, then of course that's a significant constraint. And there's also constraints include areas that could be restricted by regulatory requirements. But again, the main goal here was to identify potential constraints that would impact generally the list that you see up here in terms of cable burial, routing, siting, cable design, etc. So I'd like to pass it off to Allison to talk a little bit about our data collection and assessment.
Thank you, Ryan. So data collection was critical to this feasibility study because it informed every aspect of the study as we determined the submarine cable's viability, advantages, and potential constraints. One really helpful resource we identified was published by a marine conservation group that works with Inuit communities to develop ecological knowledge. So as many of you would know, that's a fairly unique opportunity. We also looked for other Arctic-based submarine cable studies, and we identified one study that focused on the east side of Hudson Bay. So while the data collected was different, it gave us an idea of what information might be available for all of Hudson Bay. We developed a list of potential risks and resources we wanted to identify and topics that would help us determine where the cable could be laid. Our goal was not to rule out data, but to pull in as much information as we could. So some of the topics that we looked at are listed on the slide there. That's only a few. We also looked at things like safety zones, anchorage areas, utility rights of way, commercial and recreational fish and shellfish resources, sediment type, quality, geology, all kinds of things. And if you're interested in all of the topics, I can speak with you afterwards. We quickly learned that we were going to experience some challenges related to data while developing the feasibility study. There was a lack of readily available digital data, so we had to pull in things like navigational charts and have those digitized. While the Hudson Bay and Nunavut have been studied, we're typically working in areas that have been extensively studied, most often in southern Canada. With the information we collected, our next step was to review, assess, and filter the information we collected and feed it into a GIS mapper to further assess the project and help with the constraints and opportunities analysis in developing a feasible cable route. So our GIS team helped us to create a tool that used all of the data we collected for Hudson's Bay, Manitoba, and Nunavut. We used the tool to help analyze the data and assess the cable route and landfall locations. We have a short video that demonstrates all the information we collected and how it was applied to the tool. I'm just going to hit play. Okay, so first what you see are the administrative boundaries. We can zoom in on landfill points, and this is an example of some of the hard copy data that we collected and digitized. We can zoom in on a regional level to a community level, and we can apply or remove layers to help analyze the data. In Hudson Bay, you'll see a blue line, and that is our proposed route. So the pink line are existing shipping routes. And on the land, you would have seen some purple masses, and those are Inuit-owned land as per the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement. So the preliminary corridor follows the western shoreline of Hudson Bay, and this was in order to avoid steep elevations or grade changes, boulders, any other type of underwater obstacles. We targeted water depths of about 2 meters to 24 meters and stayed within 9 kilometers of the shoreline. And that was to take advantage of the gradual slopes and sediments, and that's just more advantageous for cable burial. We look to take advantage of the shallow water depths as well, while still avoiding ice scour. And minor adjustments would likely be required as more data is obtained, but the reason we developed a preliminary center line is so that when we were coordinating with our engineers on cable design and constructability, they had something to review, to cost out, and confirm the technical guideline assumptions. The next step of the study would be to develop routes and alternative routes based on the results of the field studies. And of course, that would result in changes to the corridor. For the converter stations, the Churchill, Manitoba landfall was selected to take advantage of the developed industrial area near the port of Churchill in order to avoid the dredge area. Additionally, there's sufficient space there to accommodate the HDD laydown area. The coastline is gradual slope, which is an opportunity for HDD design and allows for a more direct overland route to the potential converter or substation location. We're leveraging opportunities, and so we looked at 2 different landfall locations in Arviat. And now I'm going to pass this back over to Ryan, who will speak about some of the advantages that were developed for the corridor.
Thanks, Allison. So based on the feasibility study at this time, there are a number of constraints that have to be de-risked. We'll talk a bit about those after, but there are some advantages and opportunities that were outlined as well. This slide just highlights a few of those opportunities in terms of what we're looking at in terms of the sites and the route. Construction methodologies. For the purposes of the feasibility study, we looked at this stage, typical installation methods for a project like this. So they would be what they call jetting, or in some cases hydroplowing, and HDD, or horizontal directional drilling. So the next steps would involve, if this were to move forward, would be to undertake those detailed studies that would inform the correct construction methodologies and the associated impact assessments that would go with those. So to highlight a couple of the risks, the key constructability risks, you'll touch on generally 3 to 4 here. So one of the big issues with these types of projects is the availability of the submarine cable, actually. They're very popular right now globally, HVDC projects, and there's unfortunately only a few manufacturers that build the cable. So generally they're booking almost 2 to 3 years out just to get the cable into for your project. So that's a risk in terms of scheduling and time. So something they need to accommodate for. Obviously in this area in Hudson's Bay, we're dealing with ice and ice scour. From a constructability standpoint, their construction season is in and around 4-ish to 5 months at the most, when Hudson's Bay is completely ice-free, so from around June to September or in thereabouts. Ice scour is another issue. So ice scour is when ice builds up, it is moved around through water or wind and digs down deep into the seabed. That can damage the cable, so it has to avoid areas like that. And one of the bigger risks we're dealing with right now is geotechnical conditions. So during the development of the feasibility study, there was just not very much data available. We have some going back 20, 30 years, but not exactly where we're looking at. So one of the first things that would be done is what they call a geophysical marine survey, where they do detailed mapping of the seabed, including LIDAR, magnetometry. They look for any other potential infrastructure, shipwrecks, boulders. Basically, they want to avoid those and identify favorable sediments or conditions to bury the cable. So that would be one of the next key things should they move forward with this part of the cable, or this part of the project. So permitting. At this stage, it was done at a very high level, just based on what we know now in terms of it, if this project could go forward. Identifying applicable permits and requirements for federally, provincially, territorially in Manitoba and Nunavut, and locally in the communities. But it's very much dependent on the ultimate route, as well as construction methodologies. So at this point, though, of course, there would be some key trigger. There would be some that are triggered: Navigable Waters Act, the migratory birds, species at risk, fisheries. Provincially and territorially, we're looking at, in Manitoba and Nunavut, the Environment Act, as well as the Nunavut Planning and Project Assessment Act. But again, this would be reviewed in much more detail in subsequent planning stages, as well as in consultation and engagement with the agencies and the local Indigenous communities. So, and that brings us to the end. So.
Thank you very much, Ryan, Allison, and Darcy. At this time, we're happy to open up the floor to questions to any of our presenters as part of Part B of today's morning session. So please, if you have any questions on the materials, feel free to raise your hand. Perhaps maybe I can get the juices flowing just to start things off. Recognize we do have a lunch coming up. Michael, I think in your presentation, one of the bad or more challenging aspects you mentioned was a certain amount of information gatekeeping, that there was a reluctance to share information, or that people who are affected by the decisions weren't getting the correct information. Can you maybe talk about some of the ways that was potentially overcome? I think you mentioned local radio as potentially a useful tool in those circumstances, but perhaps you can expand on the issue.
Thanks for the softball question.
Just trying to get us started.
It's not an easy thing, is it? Like you wonder who's actually is the gatekeeper, and if it's the lawyer, if it's the consultant, and I think as an Indigenous person in that area, I'm from Winis on the Hudson Bay coastline, and my grandmother is from Attawapskat. I wonder, are they doing actually a disservice? To the communities and not giving them the information to make an informed decision. I wonder, with the Wawate radio that we do commercials about our live streamings. So and we have those translated in Cree, so that getting people aware of these live streaming events, and part of the approved terms of reference for us anyways in Ontario was that you have to have specific engagement for the 22 communities. So we have to develop reports, 3 different rounds of engagements, through the approved EA process. And so we had to think through, okay, how do we go about making sure that that report's not blank? And so we didn't ask, when it was the best time for the, say for Adamopscat to have a live streaming. We just said it, this is gonna be the date. We're going to advertise on Wawate Radio. We're going to give you we do everything. We design the poster for them to put on their community website, on their community Facebook page, to print it up on the areas where they go. If they do that or not, I don't know. But trying to come and create the awareness about these lifestyles. We actually did we do the analysis of our social media efforts and the web page. Our website, so we can actually track how many new users, where they go, and on the website we have EA video tutorials on our website. So if they want, and they're translated as well, so you can actually trace where people are going on the website and where the most interests are, kind of thing. And so if it's about water, if it's about caribou or what have you, and then that's the thing. So it's a balancing act between trying to get the awareness up there in terms of the awareness campaign and not circumventing, the council who are, legally representing, the members, kind of thing. I think the biggest, what I mean by disservice is, the courts, Supreme Court was pretty clear. There is a reciprocal duty on part of the First Nations. If you're the proponent, they do have a reciprocal duty, and you can look that up. I just don't know, to what extent, they're gonna, they're aware of that. I've seen it in other treaty areas where the lawyer literally was telling them, don't engage, and the regulator said, too bad. They give you so much time, and opportunities. So I just don't want to see these members, and they're, I know some of these folks, in these communities that they're not engaging and consulting.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing those experiences. I see we do have a couple questions in the room. Dorothy, please.
I'm not from Ontario. Well, I am, but I haven't lived there for 30 years. So this maybe is going to feel more like a hardball question for Michael. But so I'm asking this pretty much out of ignorance. But aside from the don't want to engage, is there a substantive, positive argument on the side of those First Nations who are opposing the road, or if that's the right word, I don't know, forgive me, that's grounded in their concerns about the impacts on it? Or is your point it's too early to say that? Or what besides don't wanting to engage, is there anything substantive that's there on the other side, if I can put it that way, that is a genuine concern?
That's a good question. We can't develop mitigation measures without knowing what's being impacted, right? So I actually coach in a very implicit way when I'm engaging, the communities that's never been part of a regulatory process that, well, we're worried about water. I said, dude, you gotta be more specific. If you're gonna be general, our response is gonna be general. The more specificity you can offer, we're obligated to respond in equal specificity. So if it's a certain river or tributary or you got to be specific if that's your real concern, kind of thing. So I think the regulatory process allows that. Not participating in that, I'm not sure. The other there may be some gamemanship, I guess you can call it, around where we're going to input. And so having this decision of a regional assessment in the Ring of Fire area, I have a feeling that they're going to focus, they are focusing in fact, they're meeting this week for the 3.5 days in Thunder Bay. The folks that had no time, no energy, no capacity to engage, they're all in Thunder Bay right now. Why is that? Because the federal government put $40 million on the table. for that, for them, right? And so there's budgets being developed, there's calls. I'm on the emails, that's how I know. As the advisor to Webicway and the project manager for the environmental impact assessments, and I'm on the emails. Webicway, I think, and Martin Falls, they got people in there, but not, they're just, it's more on information exchange purposes, like if they're gonna do a baseline, so be it, but remember, they got two different hats, right? So as Indigenous proponents, they have, or Indigenous communities, they have the proponent hat, and there's a certain interest that they want to protect, as a proponent. And then they got the community hat, rights-bearing communities. That's that they have to, we do have rights and we do have a certain territory that's been mapped out, and we have a say in the regional assessment, kind of thing. So part of it's kind of deference to that, I think, and that's what I meant by, how do you compel communities, to engage on IK studies, Indigenous knowledge studies, and if they're being told, don't do it. You know what I mean? But how else are you gonna have your concerns besides through the media, right? And then going to the minister's office, from as a chief or whatever, and say we want this, this, and this, and meanwhile it's like, well, you're not saying anything in the regulatory process about these things. That's actually in scope. You got to remember, there's things out of scope that they want. So that's what I mean by that. There's certain sort of strategic imperatives that they're going after. They see a window for shared decision making or jurisdiction. They're going to jump all over that. In this case, because of the regional assessment, it's ill-defined, and they're trying to work that out this week. They think there's an opportunity there. The problem is that the federal government does not have what these First Nations want, and that's jurisdiction. That's Ontario. The Constitution is clear on that. You know what I mean? Like lands and resources in Ontario, that's what the guy, so, let's have a conversation, put $40 million on the table, but that's not what they want. They want jurisdiction. That's Ontario's business.
Thank you. Yep, I see we have another question at the back.
Thank you. I was wondering about, for both of the projects, just if there's a timeline for construction or goal date for the beginning of construction. And then my other question was also, since both these projects are Indigenous owned and led, am I correct in thinking that IBAs don't really have a part in the projects?
Darcy, did you want to start? Did you hear that question?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. And so so the first question in terms of when construction would start, our objective is we still have a fair amount of work to do before we get into construction. So we're targeting construction in around 2027, 28, with in service in the early 2030s. In terms of IBAs, we are Indigenous owned and it's owned through Inuit, but because we are going through Manitoba territories as well, there's 3 impacted First Nations that we would be working with. Right now, we expect that there will be IBAs with those communities, and then probably in place of IBAs, there would most likely be community benefit agreements with the communities in Nunavut. So that's how we're planning right now. Obviously, still a long ways to go, but that's how we're planning at this point.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And for the Ring of Fire, I think some of these communities are concerned. It's a real statement. Is even though we're not the mining companies, right? Because remember, the mining companies hasn't started their EA yet. But the first thing we do when we go to these communities is that we say that we're not the mining companies. You want to talk about chromite, you want to talk about nickel, whatever. Like, well, go talk to them. because that's not us. We're here to talk about the roads. And that's hard to swallow, right, for some of these communities, because they'll say, well, the roads are facilitating the development, right, kind of thing. I said, yeah, so that'll be in the cumulative effects assessment. You know, and we can speculate what's going to be in scope for that kind of thing. So in terms of construction, you know, you know, probably best case 3 years, base case 5, worst case 7. It's not an easy terrain area to mobilize and stuff like that, and it all depends on the proponents. You know, I'm talking about Webequie Supply Road here. I can't speak to CAR, but the right now, you know, our best case is I think is the province is March 2027, and the feds are December 2027. So the focus now, and I'm going to Thunder Bay after this thing. I got to jump on a plane to Thunder Bay to meet the chief and council. What we're looking at now is sort of a framework and roadmap to construction, right? So we're doing preliminary engineering on top of the EIA, and so how far can you go with the detailed design, you know, without triggering project delivery model discussions, right? And so is it 30%, 60%, you know, 90%? And then getting, you know, community readiness, training readiness, and business readiness. And what does that mean? That means, you know, looking for the partners that can execute in 3 years. Right? that's what I mean by that, the partnership selection process and the rest. So that's where the Webequie's chief and council is thinking now around that. 3 years is goes by like that. Oh, IBAs. Yeah. Ooh, we try to slip out of that one, eh? Yeah, that's a tricky one, because, you know, infrastructure, you know, most of it's a public good, right? Like there's no money to be made. There's no money. There's just risk and liabilities, you know, with infrastructure. Like, you know, public infrastructure, there's a reason why they're public infrastructure. So, you know, I think the discussion's moving towards, you know, there were some communities that wanted to be on the planning table or be almost like co-proponents with the two communities. They're saying, listen, that train's already left. We're in the process. It's been approved. But let's talk about commercial opportunities, right? Like, you know, let's talk about, you know, post-approval and what role you can play in this if you're looking for benefits, economic benefits. So it's not necessarily impact benefits agreement per se, but that's sort of the gist of where we want to go around the opportunities.
Thank you all. We probably have time for one final question before our lunch, if there are any volunteers or questions to be asked. Sorry, did someone have their hand up? Oh.
Thanks. With the when moving a transmission line from onshore to offshore, certainly you up the technical requirements of the contractor who's constructing the line. So I'm wondering if in your feasibility assessment, how much consideration is given to, you know, the potential loss of benefits from, you know, economic opportunities for communities to be part of the construction team, just simply because, you know, specialization, exactly, yeah.
That's a really good point, a good question. And you're right, at this stage, typically those projects do have, I've been involved in some others, and yeah, you're right, they're very technically specialized for cables of that size. And in the water, and there would be some opportunity on land where it interconnects, but not, you're right, not likely to the extent that there would be on land. That wasn't at this stage considered in the assessment. There was a high level cost feasibility done for it, but it was considered just in terms of construction costs and capital costs. Yeah. So that would be done, I think that's a good point, it would be done at the next stage.
And if I could just add on, Darcy here, it's a really good point, and that was actually brought up at our board table. So our board, part of their mandate is to create economic opportunities for Indigenous and Inuit, and that was a question that they asked as well: is how would this impact the overall economic opportunities for the communities, particularly Inuit, in terms of being able to deliver this. And because this project is they want to see this as an opportunity to create sustainable capacity building within the region, and that was a really good question, and that was brought into our structured decision making as we look at the alternatives for the routing alternatives. So it is at the forefront of our mind, always, about how do we create these good paying jobs, and it's a really good point. And right now it's still up in the air exactly how we're going to deliver the project and which alternative we'll ultimately take, but that will heavily weigh in our decision making criteria.
As, do you like hearing Indigenous voices? The projects? Yeah. Well, we're putting on a conference. We had one conference, right, called the Indigenous-led Projects Forum. It was held here in Toronto. We're going to do another one, and it's going to be on April 2nd and 3rd at the Sheraton. And the whole point of that is actually to bring major undertakings led by Indigenous communities across the country to speak to their projects. And I think the trend is Indigenous communities will be leading these major projects across the country in the future. There's a critical mass, but there'll be a tipping point where they're the proponent. You'll be working for them, kind of thing. So anyways, April 2nd and 3rd, I thought I'd just seize this opportunity to tell you about it, because there'll be many such voices as mine out at that forum. Miigwech.
Thank you very much. A very timely way to end today's session. So let's all give everyone a big round of applause to our presenters. Thank you, Ryan, Allison, Adrian, and Michael. I think Violetta is going to come up and announce some lunch plans, and thank you very much.